As thunder cracks across a stormy sky, a dark memory begins to unfold. In the pouring rain, two guards flank a kneeling figure on a public platform before a grand palace. An unseen voice viciously condemns her for the simple fact of having black hair. Her bruised face is shown as she is accused of attempting to kill Lady Alice, her own sister. Defeated and dirty, Elizabeth weeps alone in the relentless downpour. Her hands are bound behind her back as a faint voice asks if she's all right. In a flashback, gossiping nobles are outraged that she would dare to lay a hand on the saintess. The accusations escalate, claiming she even attempted to assassinate the crown prince. A noble relishes the thought that the cursed child is finally going to die. Two noblewomen are seen smiling with malicious satisfaction. Back in the rain, Elizabeth looks down in utter despair. Through the storm, a pair of intense lavender eyes watches the scene unfold. His jaw is set in a grim, unreadable line. Elizabeth hangs her head, whispering that it's all her fault. A voice sentences her for the attempted murder of Crown Prince Caesar Marax and her sister, Lady Alice Clarity. The final, damning verdict is delivered: execution by beheading. Overwhelmed, Elizabeth weakly insists that she never tried to kill them. She flashes back to memories of past cruelties she inflicted upon Alice. Hiding her face behind a fan, she admits to herself that she was indeed cruel to Alice. Returning to the present, Elizabeth's face is a mask of hopeless resignation. As a guard yanks her head up by her hair, she sees a wide-eyed Alice looking on. Elizabeth's eyes widen in confusion as she sees Caesar standing with Alice. In another memory, Alice stands over a kneeling Elizabeth. A desperate Elizabeth clutches Alice's dress, seemingly begging for help. Leaning in close, Alice whispers with a wicked smile that it was all her doing. The memory shifts to a peaceful tea party in a gazebo with Elizabeth, Caesar, and Alice. A spoon stirs a cup of tea, a delicate butterfly resting on the saucer. Caesar urges a hesitant Elizabeth to drink her tea. Alice smiles sweetly, framed by a halo of pink roses. When Alice suggests serving tea to their guests, Elizabeth reacts with visible annoyance. Elizabeth reluctantly hands a teacup to Alice, who thanks her sister with a smile. After taking a sip, Alice's eyes suddenly fly open in shock. She clutches her throat as blood spills from her lips, collapsing in her chair. A maid rushes in, dropping her handkerchief in horror at the scene. "Kaya!" A terrified scream echoes through the garden. Caesar watches grimly as a noblewoman wonders aloud if the tea was poisoned. Elizabeth jumps to her feet in a panic, desperately proclaiming her innocence. The memory fades, leaving Elizabeth looking horrified in her prison clothes. Alice laughs manically, declaring that a cursed, black-haired child like Elizabeth isn't even worth keeping alive. The vision of a triumphant Alice standing over a defeated Elizabeth solidifies. Facing her execution, Elizabeth tearfully wonders if this is how she is going to die. The executioner raises his gleaming sword high above her. As the crowd chants for her death, Elizabeth braces herself, thinking she's not ready yet. With her last moments ticking away, she closes her eyes, not ready for the end. Her eyes snap open, filled with a sudden, fierce, and defiant light. With a sharp gasp, her purple eyes widen in the darkness. Elizabeth jolts awake in her bed, gasping and clutching her chest in terror. Sunlight streams into her elegant, peaceful room, a stark contrast to the nightmare. She sits up, wondering if it was a dream, but admits it felt far too real. She shudders, vividly recalling the physical sensation of her execution and Alice's terrifying cruelty. A hand gently holds a beautiful, sparkling butterfly brooch. A woman with long brown hair recalls clutching this very item during her execution. She flashes back to a painful memory of her hands being bound in shackles. She questions the impossibility of having gone to bed while holding the brooch. A quiet moment of contemplation passes as she clasps her hands together. Suddenly, a sound from the doorway makes her turn around in alarm. A maid appears in the doorway, calling out, "Lady Elizabeth?" The maid, looking concerned, asks Elizabeth if something is wrong. Overwhelmed with emotion, Elizabeth begins to cry. Shocked by her tears, the maid cries out Elizabeth's name in alarm. Elizabeth quickly reassures the maid that nothing is wrong, apologizing for the worry. Elizabeth vows to live a kinder life for the caring maid, who remains suspicious of her behavior. Elsewhere, a blonde woman walks down a grand hallway with a subtle smile on her face. With cold determination, Elizabeth stares ahead, accepting an unspoken challenge. The blonde woman's face appears, her expression unreadable. The maid cautiously tries to get the attention of a distracted Elizabeth. Elizabeth snaps back to reality with a cheerful laugh, asking what's wrong. The maid is left speechless by Elizabeth's uncharacteristically cheerful attitude. Elizabeth reflects that her former self would have glared coldly in this situation. Brushing it off, Elizabeth warmly asks why the maid came to her room. The maid presents a gift box, explaining that it was sent by Lady Alice. As Elizabeth stares at the gift, its long red ribbon seems to ensnare the room. The wrapping paper is adorned with star patterns and the image of a wolf. A flashback shows a kind-looking woman telling a younger girl that a handkerchief is like a talisman. Holding the box, Elizabeth suspects this gift carries a hidden, sinister meaning. A heavy, oppressive atmosphere descends as she contemplates the gift. Her thoughts drift into a dark memory. Once upon a time, in a dense forest, there lived a pack of wolves. Among them was a young wolf named Luna, known for her curious nature and adventurous spirit. Luna often ventured to the outskirts of the forest, observing the world beyond her familiar territory. One day, she stumbled upon a hidden path that led to a world she never knew existed. The image of the wolf fills her mind. A wolf, she wonders, connecting the symbol to her painful past. She recalls a memory of the blonde woman's cruel, knowing smirk. In her memory, Alice begins to describe the cruel destiny of a wolf. It is a creature destined to be hated and left all alone, she continues. With a vicious sneer, Alice adds that it remains rough and vulgar, despite any attempts at refinement. No better than a stray dog, right? She concludes mockingly. The harsh words from the past cut deep into Elizabeth's memory. Alice's voice echoes in her mind, predicting she will always be a lonely outcast. Even the title of Crown Princess, the memory taunts, is just a useless decoration. The wolf, she was told, has always been her, a cursed child with no true grace. The maid wildly misinterprets the gift, believing Alice meant the wolf symbolizes grace and beauty. Well, bless her heart, Elizabeth cringes internally at the maid's painfully naive interpretation. Forcing a smile, Elizabeth agrees with the maid's cheerful assessment of the handkerchief. The maid eagerly offers to prepare for a thank you letter, and Elizabeth calmly agrees. She remembers her past life, where she lost her temper and tore Alice's gift to shreds. She recalls the cold stares she received that day and regrets her foolish, immature reaction. Still, she questions Alice's motive for sending another gift, wondering what she's planning this time. A sudden, terrible realization dawns on her. She remembers a crucial detail. Alice was with Lord Caesar that day. Elizabeth realizes that Alice is furious because Elizabeth is now set to marry Lord Caesar, disrupting their plans. Dark moths flutter through a thorny, ominous nightscape, heralding a sinister turn of events. In a chilling memory, Alice embraces Caesar, plotting to use their alliance to eliminate Elizabeth and her entire family. Filled with newfound purpose, Elizabeth throws open her bedroom doors, ready to act. She rushes down the hall as startled maids and butlers watch her pass in a blur. With quiet determination, Elizabeth arrives before a grand set of doors, steeling herself for a confrontation. With 2 sharp knocks, she nervously but resolutely summons the person inside. A voice from within the room cautiously asks, "Who is there?" Elizabeth respectfully announces herself to Lord Caesar as the door opens. Lord Caesar appears, his cold, piercing blue eyes fixed on her. Gulp. Elizabeth is momentarily frozen, terrified by his intense and intimidating gaze. She clenches her fist, reminding herself that she will never allow herself to suffer that miserable death again. Surrounded by a swirl of ethereal butterflies, Elizabeth makes a solemn vow to keep her distance from now on. She turns away, symbolically leaving Caesar behind at his desk as she resolves to walk a different path. Caesar watches the light fade, his expression thoughtful and unreadable after her sudden departure. Back in her room, Elizabeth is startled by another knock at her door. The maid enters, apologizing for the intrusion and offering to help her change clothes. Elizabeth calmly agrees but pauses as a painful memory begins to surface. She remembers her past life, where she would dress up every evening and wait for a Lord Caesar who never came. Calling her past self foolish, she vows to never again waste such effort hoping for his attention. She decides her entanglement with him is over. No more wasted effort. It ends now. The maid's hesitant voice breaks Elizabeth's reverie, pulling her back to the present. Elizabeth sadly intuits the maid's hesitation, believing she is afraid to touch her cursed black hair. The narration explains that black hair is considered a symbol of ominous death. Among the many dark rumors, it is a sign of a cursed existence. Legends claim those with black hair can return from the dead or kill with a curse, making them feared. The imagery of her past is steeped in blood-red malice and darkness. Despite belonging to the noble house of Clarity, Elizabeth was always avoided for this reason. She recalls how her parents showered Alice with love while treating her, the one with black hair, with cold indifference. While golden-haired Alice grew up beloved, Elizabeth was consumed by a jealousy that festered in the shadows. Her inner turmoil manifested as a monstrous, shadowy version of herself. In a flashback, Alice grabs her arm during a social gathering, setting a scene. Elizabeth is then pushed, falling into a nobleman as onlookers gasp in shock. Alice masterfully plays the victim, crying out to defend her pitiful sister from judgment. Furious at the blatant manipulation, Elizabeth confronts Alice and blames her for the incident. To the onlookers, Alice appears to comfort her sister, but Elizabeth sees the deception in her eyes. Alice leans in and whispers a false promise of support, completing her performance. The crowd, completely deceived, praises Alice's kind-heartedness and dubs her a true saint. Elizabeth knows the truth. Alice only pretended to defend her to earn the title of Saintess. Returning to the present, Elizabeth reflects that her former self would have angrily thrown the maid out for her hesitation. Instead, she calmly dismisses the maid, deciding to change her clothes by herself. She thinks grimly that if she really had a curse, she would have used it on everyone long ago. She recalls a lifetime of baseless accusations, slander, and contemptuous stares that felt like daggers. Overwhelmed by despair, she had often wanted to die, attacking others with curses just to protect herself. With a serene expression, Elizabeth embraces her new path, having decided to live a kind life. Since that day of resolution, a change has begun at the estate. The maids are visibly surprised by the shift in the atmosphere around the house. A smiling Elizabeth cheerfully greets the staff, thanking them for their hard work with the linens. She expresses her love for the garden flowers, kindly complimenting the maids on their tender care. The maids whisper among themselves, wondering what Elizabeth is planning with her sudden change in behavior. In a quiet moment, Elizabeth sits reading a book while the maid prepares her tea. The maid approaches cautiously, her hands trembling nervously as she carries the tea service. Wah! She suddenly trips and cries out, spilling the hot tea directly onto Elizabeth. Elizabeth's eyes flash with fury as a dark, familiar anger begins to surface. Terrified, the maid falls to her knees and begs for forgiveness, certain she is doomed. Seeing the maid's absolute terror, Elizabeth clenches her fist and forces herself to remain calm, remembering her vow. A warm smile lights up her face as she gently asks the maid if she was hurt. Peeking from the doorway, the other maids are visibly moved by this act of kindness. Her unexpected compassion begins to thaw the fearful hearts of the household staff. Elizabeth reflects on how difficult it was to regain their trust, realizing how horrible she must have been. Her thoughts are interrupted by a stern voice from afar, criticizing her terrible posture. A woman sits opposite her, instructing her to straighten her back and lift her chest. Elizabeth begins her training as a crown princess, under the tutelage of the strict Duchess Marianne. Duchess Marianne is renowned for her demanding nature, and few have ever earned her praise. She recalls her past life's lack of training and resolves to master proper etiquette this time. Determined, Elizabeth vows to gain Marianne's approval as a weapon in her quest for revenge against Alice. On a beautiful day, Elizabeth enjoys a refreshing walk in the garden with her smiling maids. She reflects that keeping her distance from Lord Caesar has made her feel surprisingly lighter. Her peaceful thoughts are shattered by a renewed determination to get her revenge on Alice. Lost in thought, she is startled and trips over her feet with a cry. Looking up, she sees a couple walking together in the distance, a sight that gives her pause. Her blood runs cold as she recognizes the two people walking intimately, Alice and Lord Caesar. A quick flashback shows her vowing to Caesar that she will keep her distance from now on. Caesar puzzles over Elizabeth's sudden change, recalling how she once clung to him but now actively avoids him. An attendant reports to him that Elizabeth has started Crown Princess lessons and requested a capable instructor. Declining the attendant's offer, Caesar decides that he will appoint an instructor for her himself. He initially suspected it was a ploy for his attention, but has heard she is taking her lessons seriously. The scene transitions. sunlight dappling through the leaves of the trees. Standing alone, Caesar wonders aloud if Elizabeth is truly trying to avoid him. He summons a mysterious hooded figure named Alan, who promptly appears to await his orders. Caesar's eyes glow with intensity as he commands Alan to keep an eye on Elizabeth. After his attendant departs, Caesar gazes out the window with a thoughtful sigh. A subtle, calculating smirk crosses his face as he watches the world outside. The scene shifts back to Caesar and Alice walking together through the forest path. Hidden in the bushes, a devastated Elizabeth watches them, wondering why they're together. From another hiding spot, Alan watches Elizabeth before she turns and flees the scene in anguish. Elizabeth runs breathlessly through the gardens, trying to escape the painful sight. She stumbles to a halt and begins to sob, admitting she didn't want to believe what she saw. It dawns on her that even before her death, Alice and Caesar were secretly meeting. Collapsing against a door, she fears that she is destined to be murdered by the pair once again. Realizing their love makes her an obstacle, she steels her resolve, refusing to let them kill her again. She remembers how Alice's kindness made everyone love and worry for her, even in the face of danger. Shaking her head, Elizabeth rallies her spirits with a newfound sense of purpose. She pictures the staff, whose trust and smiles she has only just begun to earn. Overwhelmed with guilt, she calls herself the worst for even considering using those people for her plans. Standing up, she decides to get some tea to calm down and clear her mind. As she reaches for the door, she resolves to think carefully about how she should move forward. The door swings open to reveal Alice, whose sinister smile sends a shiver down Elizabeth's spine. Alice appears with an angelic smile, surrounded by soft light and floating feathers. Elizabeth stares in shock, barely able to utter Alice's name. Alice cheerfully asks if Elizabeth has been well, to which she receives a curt confirmation. With a sinister smile, Alice reveals she saw a black wolf spying on her and Caesar, making Elizabeth realize she was spotted. Elizabeth knows Alice is taunting her, but while Alice feigns concern, Elizabeth resolves not to fall for the provocation like she would have in the past. As a hand reaches for Alice, she piously declares that violence solves nothing and would only put her at a disadvantage. Elizabeth laughs, sarcastically thanking Alice for being so sweet as to worry about the big bad wolf. Finding her reaction strange, Alice looks flustered, which Elizabeth correctly interprets as annoyance that her violent bait failed. Alice demands to be led into the room, but Elizabeth coolly asks why she should allow it. Playing the victim, Alice chides her sister for her dreadful manners, suggesting they can't keep talking while standing. Elizabeth finds it strange that Alice would bring up manners now, a sentiment that visibly confuses her sister. Elizabeth confronts Alice for visiting the Crown Prince without notice, but Alice dismisses the need to report to her, fueled by an entitled attitude. Alice smugly declares herself the Crown Princess, to which Elizabeth calmly replies, "And?" Turning the tables, Elizabeth lectures Alice on proper etiquette, stating she should send notice beforehand and learn basic manners. Ugh. Alice gasps in fury, enraged by Elizabeth's audacity. Tisk. Alice turns away in a huff, and Elizabeth notes it's the first time she's ever seen her so flustered. A moment later, Alice turns back with a chilling, triumphant smirk. She takes a determined step forward. Wah! As Alice tries to force her way inside, Elizabeth grabs her arm to stop her. Alice dramatically throws herself backward, creating the illusion of a violent push as Elizabeth watches in stunned disbelief. Crying crocodile tears, Alice accuses Elizabeth of cruelty, while a maid rushes in, calling her name in alarm. As an attendant asks what's wrong, Alice sobs that Elizabeth's reaction was too much, leaving her unable to believe it. Elizabeth realizes with dawning horror that it was all an act. She despairs, thinking of how hard she worked to regain trust, only to see her progress shattered by Alice's deception. The servants gather around the weeping Alice, isolating Elizabeth as Caesar watches from a nearby doorway. Caesar observes the unfolding drama with a cold, calculating gaze. He steps forward. A red-haired attendant behind him is shocked as Elizabeth questions Caesar's sudden appearance. In a distorted view, the servants cluster around Alice on the floor, united against a common enemy. She looks down at her sister's performance, wondering how she could go this far. A dark hand of malice seems to emanate from the kneeling Alice. The servants whisper among themselves, judging Elizabeth and wondering how she could do such a thing. A maid consoles Alice, who hides her face to continue the charade. Her eyes glow with malevolent red light as she smiles wickedly, revealing a true nature only Elizabeth ever sees. In contrast, Elizabeth recalls her own past, a villain who hid her face behind a fan. She remembers her history of sneering and speaking harshly. The memory of her resorting to public violence flashes through her mind. Resigned, she accepts that it's only natural for everyone to take Alice's side. She thinks of how Alice is beloved simply for existing, pictured in a field of flowers. The contrast once fueled her jealousy, but she decides now is not the time to drown in those feelings. As Caesar watches her, a pair of hands reaches out toward the crying Alice. To everyone's surprise, Elizabeth gently takes Alice's hands and helps her to her feet. The staff is stunned that Lady Elizabeth is apologizing as she calmly asks Alice to return another time. Elizabeth internally debates her options, realizing an apology for pushing would be an admission of guilt as she walks away. She clenches her fist, overwhelmed by the impossible situation. Caesar strides forward with an air of authority, announcing that Lady Elizabeth of House Clarity has just struck someone. As Caesar arrives, Elizabeth and the servants look on in shock, while Alice feigns surprise at His Highness's presence. Caesar remarks that it looked like Elizabeth was merely brushing something away, then pointedly asks if he is mistaken, putting her to the test. Elizabeth panics, realizing Lord Caesar saw the confrontation and worries about how much he witnessed. She reasons that even if he saw everything, Alice is skilled enough to manipulate the situation to her advantage. However, she realizes if Caesar sided with Alice, he would have condemned her on the spot. Pondering his motives, she wonders why he's asking for her side of the story. Seizing the opportunity, Elizabeth lies, claiming she was simply brushing a bug off Alice's dress. Noticing Caesar's silence, she realizes he isn't immediately denying her story and presses on. She continues her performance, suggesting Alice mistakenly thought she was about to be slapped. Elizabeth apologizes to a stunned Alice, admitting her past behavior made the misunderstanding inevitable. Alice's face contorts with rage at the turn of events. Elizabeth reflects that while planning revenge, she had always been held back by her own guilt. Caesar asks for clarification, and Elizabeth internally sheds her guilt, now seeing Alice as trash and feeling free to seek true revenge. She gently holds Alice's face and offers a sincere-sounding apology. With a pained expression, Elizabeth tearfully asks Alice if she will forgive her. Elizabeth knows her plan is flawless. Alice must forgive her to maintain her saintly image before Caesar and the staff. Feigning concern, Elizabeth points out Alice's flushed face and asks a maid to fetch a cold cloth. A hand suddenly moves to intervene, blocking her from Alice. Caesar steps between them, placing a comforting hand on Alice's shoulder. Alice seethes silently, clenching her fist in frustration. Caesar takes Alice's hand, stating that he and Elizabeth will handle things from here on. Alice notes he called Elizabeth by her name, but Caesar coolly asks if it's wrong to call his wife by name, forcing her to agree before she pretends her ankle is healed. Announcing she'd only be in the way, Alice gives a curtsy and prepares to leave. Elizabeth watches her go, contemplating her sister's next move. As Alice walks away, her face twists into a mask of fury, vowing to repay Elizabeth for the humiliation. The door slams shut, and a maid calls out to Alice in concern. Two maids watch from behind as Alice storms down the corridor. Alice plots her revenge, deciding to invite Elizabeth to a tea party for some special treatment. Back in the room, Elizabeth and Caesar watch Alice depart with her maids. Caesar remains silent and thoughtful, while two attendants stand by nervously. Turning to his attendants, Caesar announces their departure and they bow deeply. Elizabeth hesitantly calls out to Caesar as he begins to leave. He turns, surprising her by stating that she is really changed. She reflects that his eyes still feel as cold and piercing as ever. Despite his gaze, she is startled to find a hint of gentleness in his tone. Caesar unexpectedly pats her head, causing Elizabeth to flinch in surprise. Stunned, she looks up and questions what he is doing. A faint, gentle smile plays on Caesar's lips. Her heart flutters as his hand remains gently on her head. He asks if something is wrong, explaining he is simply patting his wife's head. Flustered, Elizabeth points out the stigma of her black hair. Caesar calmly asks her if her hair color is an issue. At a loss for words, she feels his fingers gently move through her hair. Caesar admits he expected her to rant childishly, and Elizabeth bristles at his perception, acknowledging her past self would have done just that. Testing him, Elizabeth asks what he would have done if she had admitted to attacking Alice. He states he wouldn't have done anything drastic, not wanting to cause trouble for her family. However, he adds that he would have been deeply disappointed in her foolishness. The word disappointed strikes a nerve, and she clenches her hands tightly. She falls silent, unable to respond to his words. Noticing her quiet demeanor, Caesar smiles and remarks once again how much she's changed. His repeated observation leaves Elizabeth speechless and confused. Looking at him closely, she notices his sharpened jawline and realizes he's gotten thinner from his duties. Elizabeth expresses her concern, asking Caesar if he has been getting any rest lately. He coolly asks why she would care, and she explains that he doesn't look well rested. Caesar playfully points out the irony of her concern while she's been actively avoiding him. He questions if her concern is genuine, leaving Elizabeth flustered and at a loss for words. She defensively asks what else her concern could be, then quickly apologizes for sounding doubtful. Caesar's gaze intensifies as he studies her, framed by delicate flowers. Elizabeth repeats her apology with a nervous smile, flustered by the sudden turn of events. Internally panicking, she admits she wasn't angry, and his apology has left her unsure how to react. To her utter shock, Caesar covers his mouth and begins to laugh heartily. PFFT. Ha ha ha. Stunned, Elizabeth realizes this is the very first time she has ever seen him smile. She finds the moment surprisingly embarrassing as he softly calls her by her name, Elizabeth. In a gentle tone, he invites her to visit him in the study anytime she wishes. She is bewildered by his sudden change, recalling how he used to explicitly tell her not to come. An attendant's voice interrupts, announcing that Lady Clarity has invited her to a tea party. Surprised, Elizabeth informs Caesar that this is the first she's hearing of the invitation. With newfound confidence, she declares that she will be sure to attend once the invitation arrives. The scene shifts to Alice, who stands on a balcony overlooking a beautiful estate. Sunlight bathes Alice in a golden glow as she tucks a strand of hair behind her ear. The setting changes again to Elizabeth, who is elegantly sipping tea. She sits with Duchess Marianne, thanking her and addressing her as Governess Marianne. Marianne maintains her stern and impeccable posture, an aura of authority surrounding her. With a sigh, Marianne confesses that she is still not accustomed to being called governess. Elizabeth asks if she made things uncomfortable, but Marianne reassures her, after which Elizabeth insists on calling her governess out of respect for her teaching. A hint of emotion crosses Marianne's face as she listens, a small box in her hands. Your Royal Highness, Crown Princess Elizabeth. She presents Elizabeth with a small gift, a pair of exquisite glowing crystal earrings. The earrings are made from a rare gem that glows on its own with shimmering rainbow hues. Elizabeth realizes the gemstones must be from the famous mines in Marianne's husband's territory. Noting that Marianne's formal address made her nervous, she watches as Marianne offers to help her put on the earrings. A wave of genuine happiness washes over Elizabeth as she accepts the thoughtful present. As Marianne helps her, Elizabeth marvels at how beautiful the earrings are. Feeling truly happy, her expression turns determined as she thinks to herself that, with this, she can finally move forward. She recalls how many influential nobles used to side with Alice, leaving her isolated. Elizabeth affirms her strategy. She needed a strong ally and chose to win over Marianne, a major power in high society. She knew it would be difficult, as the famously strict Marianne rarely granted anyone her approval. Despite the odds, her resolve is firm. She couldn't afford to give up. A montage shows her dedication as she masters tea party manners, elegant posture, greetings, and dining etiquette. She reflects that while the Duchess's lessons were incredibly strict, she gave it her all to earn her approval. Elizabeth asks if it's truly all right to accept such a valuable gift, and Marianne insists, hoping to see her at the upcoming tea party. Marianne suddenly gives her a joyful hug, causing a flustered Elizabeth to comment on the improper display. Marianne reflects on Elizabeth's poor upbringing, noting that her lack of early education is obvious compared to her sister. Marianne feels that ostracizing a child for their hair color is inexcusable, and, seeing Elizabeth's true kind nature, resolves to help her. Elizabeth beams with joy, explaining it's the first gift she's ever received, and thanking Marianne profusely. She knows that Alice also studies under the Duchess, but has never received such a gift. Elizabeth smiles slyly, eager to see Alice's reaction, and decides she will definitely wear the earrings to the party. The scene transitions through a frame of green leaves. Arriving at the mansion, Elizabeth feels a sense of dread, admitting she has no good memories of this place. She steels herself, aware that the guests were all invited by Alice, and prepared for their hostility. A flashback reminds her of the last time she lost control and caused a scene in front of Alice. Her eyes burn with determination, as she vows that this time will be different. The ornate double doors to the tea party swing open. With newfound determination, Elizabeth prepares to face her sister's trap. As she enters, the gossiping ladies fall silent, their whispers filling the air with hostility. Elizabeth realizes she's the only one not wearing a white dress, confirming she's been deliberately set up. Alice approaches with a dazzlingly innocent smile, greeting Sis Elizabeth. As Elizabeth notes, the situation feels different from the past. With feigned surprise, Alice exclaims that she didn't think Elizabeth would actually come. Hiding behind a fan, Alice compliments Elizabeth's beauty and mentions she has prepared a special seat for her. Alice gestures towards the table of ladies, inviting Elizabeth to join them. Elizabeth observes the hostile glares from Alice's inner circle, who rudely remark on her lack of manners, and she addresses Alice as Lady Clarity. Walking past her sister, Elizabeth thanks her for the invitation and the specially prepared seat. With a beaming smile, Elizabeth declares that she is truly honored to be there. Internally, she decides she won't be sitting in the assigned seat, much to Alice's surprise. Elizabeth resolves to repay Alice's favor in kind, her gaze fixed on the table of ladies. She confidently approaches the table and greets the other ladies with a warm smile. A woman with pink hair greets Elizabeth, passive-aggressively complimenting her on her striking black hair. Playing along, Elizabeth smiles sweetly and says she's flattered by the compliment. She then feigns ignorance, asking who the woman is and pointing out that everyone's similar outfits are confusing her. Offended, the woman announces she is from the prestigious house of Colonna. The Colonna lady chastises Elizabeth for not knowing to stand for a count's daughter, but Elizabeth coolly dismisses her house as not being worth much. Outraged, the lady from House Colonna slams her hand on the table. The other guests gasp at Elizabeth's audacity, while Alice feigns concern. Unfazed by the commotion, Elizabeth calmly takes a sip of her tea. The Colonna lady trembles with rage at the insult. She furiously snaps back, questioning how a black-haired girl could say her family isn't worth much. Elizabeth inwardly notes the severe disrespect of a count's daughter calling the crown princess a black-haired girl. Her eyes glowing, Elizabeth questions if the insult was directed at the entire imperial family. Terrified, the Colonna lady quickly tries to retract her statement. Flustered, she looks to Alice for help, surprised that Elizabeth isn't causing her usual scene. Alice's eyes widen in shock as she notices Elizabeth's glowing earrings and addresses her formally. Elizabeth pointedly mentions the earrings are a gift from Duchess Marianne, causing the Colonna lady to stammer that it has nothing to do with anything. Now addressing her as Lady Colonna, Elizabeth watches as the woman stammers a terrified apology to Crown Princess Elizabeth. Leaning forward, Elizabeth calmly asks her if she is afraid. With a serene smile, she reassures the woman she doesn't kill birds for chirping too loudly, a thinly veiled threat. A tense silence falls over the tea table as the other ladies watch in fear. Elizabeth inwardly scoffs, thinking how pathetic they are to be so intimidated by a pair of earrings. She gives Alice a sharp, knowing stare over her teacup. Elizabeth notes Alice's continued fixation on the earrings, wondering just how much the gift upsets her. A flustered Alice stands, apologizing and correcting herself, from Sis to Your Highness, the Crown Princess. Elizabeth asks if she may be excused, and Alice nervously agrees. Forcing a smile, Alice claims that just having her there was an honor. As Elizabeth turns to leave, Alice's strained smile remains, while calling her Sis Elizabeth. Elizabeth announces her departure and walks away, leaving the tense tea party behind. On her way out, a woman with blonde hair steps forward to greet her. The woman gently stops Elizabeth before she can leave the room. She greets Elizabeth with a deep, respectful curtsy, calling her the Empire's shining star. Elizabeth notes that this person has never looked down on her because of her black hair, a view of the woman's elegant white dress and posture. The woman is formally introduced as Lady Michelle Shea, daughter of Duke Shea. The narration explains that House Shea is the second most powerful noble family, competing with Alice's House of Clarity. Elizabeth reflects that even though she is the outcast of House Clarity, Michelle has always been the one person who treated her without prejudice. In a flashback, Elizabeth recalls formally meeting Michelle for the first time. She remembers Michelle's perfectly polite and graceful posture. Overcome with regret, Elizabeth wonders why she once ignored Michelle's kindness. A memory surfaces of her being violently pushed at a party. She remembers lashing out in a rage, smashing a cup as another lady taunted her to take a break, while she yelled back. In the past, Elizabeth accused Michelle of only pretending to be kind out of a sense of superiority, though Michelle denied it. The narration notes Michelle's eyes only showed sadness. Her memory concludes with her storming out of that tea party in a fury. Back in the present, Elizabeth's old paranoia surfaces as she wonders if Michelle's kindness is a trap. She clenches her fist, questioning her own cynicism and considering if the kindness was genuine. Another memory shows Michelle extending a hand, inviting her to tea. Elizabeth remembers worrying that associating with her would tarnish Michelle's reputation. Despite her concerns, she recalls smiling and happily accepting the invitation. In the present, Alice and her friend call out to Michelle, inviting her to leave Elizabeth and join them. Michelle politely thanks Alice for the invitation, but declares her intention to greet Elizabeth first. Alice is left utterly stunned and speechless by the public rejection. Beaming, Michelle tells Elizabeth that she has always wanted to speak with her. Unaccustomed to such open affection, Elizabeth admits to herself that she's not used to this. Michelle stands happily by Elizabeth's side as Elizabeth gives a small, shy smile. Elizabeth realizes that besides Michelle, there was one other person who was kind to her, recalling a happy, red-haired boy. As she approaches Alice's table with her new companion, Elizabeth remains wary that this could be a trap. Suddenly, the ladies notice a man has arrived. Elizabeth is shocked to see Prince August Mirax, recalling he was present at the last disastrous party too. August confidently strides past the other guests, heading directly for Elizabeth's table. He approaches with a charming smile, his eyes fixed on a surprised Elizabeth. Surrounded by an aura of white roses, August gently takes Elizabeth's hand. Elizabeth is completely bewildered by his action, questioning what he could possibly be thinking. The moment lingers as August holds her hand, his smile unwavering while she remains in shock. A profile explains August is the only child of Queen Lillian and a favorite of the king. Elizabeth recalls that in her past life, August was engaged to Alice. Confused, she wonders why he would greet her first, suspecting it's because she is with Alice's rival, Michelle. A voice suddenly calls out, "Your Highness." August turns to see Alice rushing toward him, calmly addressing her by name. Alice performs a perfect curtsy, greeting August as the young son of the Empire. Observing from the side, Elizabeth notices Alice is upset and scratching her hand in anger, a habit she doubts either of them have noticed. As August's eyes briefly flick over, Elizabeth maintains a serene expression. August turns back to a nervous Alice, apologizing for arriving early and possibly disrupting her party. A flustered Alice quickly insists that his presence is not a disruption at all. Elizabeth watches Alice nervously wring her hands, recognizing her telltale sign of anxiety. Alice seethes, realizing her plan to have August witness Elizabeth blowing up has failed. Elizabeth deduces the entire setup. She was meant to cause a scene so August could swoop in and rescue the victimized Alice. With a smirk, Elizabeth inwardly mocks Alice, who clearly didn't expect her to remain composed. The scene shows gossiping ladies as the narration explains that a prince's appearance at a ladies-only party creates a scandal, and Alice, who clearly orchestrated his arrival, will now face his disapproval for the impropriety. Elizabeth muses on how she'd love to hear Alice try to explain this awkward situation to August. No longer holding back, Elizabeth laughs with delight at her sister's failed scheme. A view from behind shows Alice's tense posture. Alice gasps, finally realizing the tables have turned, as Elizabeth watches her coolly. The other ladies begin to leave, and a panicked Alice begs them to stay. Elizabeth watches Alice flounder, sarcastically wishing her a good time with Prince August, before turning to leave herself. As the guests depart, leaving Alice alone with August on the steps, Elizabeth and Michelle head for their carriage. Before departing, Elizabeth turns back and calls out to Michelle. Elizabeth thanks Michelle for the invitation and asks if they can arrange another gathering sometime. Michelle is overjoyed by the request, telling Elizabeth she is honored. Phew. In her carriage, Elizabeth lets out a sigh of relief. Surrounded by flowers, she smiles happily, thankful that Michelle accepted her offer of friendship. In a grand office, a red-haired man reports to a blonde-haired man standing by his desk. The blonde man reads a letter with a thoughtful expression before letting out a quiet sigh. He places his hand on the desk, his gaze hardening with resolve. Looking out the window, he crosses his arms and says, "Finally, a map introduces the Kingdom of Servin, an ideal stopover for exporting goods from the Mirax Empire." The narration explains August had visited the kingdom to handle export negotiations. The blonde man deduces Alice hasn't given up on pursuing August, noting she sent a letter instead of appearing in person, because August has fallen out of favor with the Empress. HMPH. He scoffs that he'd rather not see her face anyway. The red-haired man remarks that the two of them are just the same as ever, adding that anyone else would have been executed for what they did, which makes a chibi version of him terrified. The blonde man smirks and agrees he should be more careful, sharing a knowing glance with him, staring out the window. The blonde man predicts that the palace will soon be in turmoil again. He turns, wondering aloud if she will be able to endure the coming chaos. The red-haired man notices a dropped letter and realizes it means August and Alice are finally getting engaged. Meanwhile, Elizabeth sits peacefully in an opulent room, reading a book. As a maid walks by with a vase, Elizabeth calls out, "Emma, would you come here for a moment?" A nervous Emma asks what she wants, and Elizabeth stands to present her with a prepared gift. Emma marvels at the lovely scent of the hand cream, and Elizabeth explains she specially ordered it after noticing Emma's hands were dry. A shocked Emma stares at her hands, which Elizabeth is now holding. Surrounded by a saintly aura, Elizabeth warmly thanks Emma for her hard work and says she'll continue to rely on her. Overcome with emotion, Emma tearfully exclaims that she should be the one thanking Elizabeth. Two other maids whisper to each other, agreeing that Elizabeth's personality seems to have completely changed. Elizabeth reflects that while her efforts have improved her reputation, Alice still had far more supporters at the party. Watching her maids, she acknowledges that reputations don't change easily and resolves to keep working harder. Her eyes widen as she senses a presence, thinking, that person is... She sees August walking down the hallway. She recognizes him as His Highness August. August formally greets Elizabeth, quote, young son of the Empire, and apologizes for his discourteous behavior at the tea party. Inwardly, Elizabeth notes his high status and wonders at his friendliness as he tells her she's as radiant as ever. Flattered but cautious, Elizabeth returns the compliment, telling August he looks wonderful. August smiles warmly, insisting she just call him by his first name. Elizabeth stands opposite him, her expression unreadable. A profile introduces the first prince, Caesar Morax, a cold-blooded war hero who became crown prince through his popularity. Another profile introduces the second prince, August Morax, the Empress Lillian's only child and a favorite of the commoners, noting rumors that the half-brothers do not get along. Elizabeth inwardly acknowledges that August is a dazzling and undeniably good man, but decides appearances are all that matter. Suddenly, another hand forcefully grabs hers, shocking both her and August. An enraged Caesar pulls a stunned Elizabeth behind him, shielding her from August. Caesar furiously demands to know what business August has with his wife. August greets him as brother, but Caesar coldly repeats his question. August puts his hands up defensively, explaining he simply ran into her and wanted to say hello. Caesar firmly takes Elizabeth's hand and announces they are leaving. Startled, Elizabeth stammers her agreement, calling him Lord Caesar. Caesar pulls a stumbling Elizabeth away, leaving a bewildered August watching them go. He leads her briskly down the hallway. Elizabeth glances back with a worried expression. A look of concern flickers across Caesar's eyes. He continues walking forward, still holding her hand. A flustered Elizabeth follows, trying to keep up. She panics, worrying that Caesar has misunderstood her conversation with August as a secret affair. She recalls how she used to cling to him, and now realizes her sudden distance looks suspicious, resolving not to be executed over a misunderstanding. Annoyed at the situation, Elizabeth clenches her fist as Caesar walks ahead, a troubled look on his face. As he holds her hand, Caesar quietly wonders if he's walking too fast for her. Caesar observes Elizabeth's wrists, thinking how slender and fragile they look. Releasing her, he wonders if he held on too tightly, while Elizabeth looks up in surprise at his pained expression. As Caesar turns away, Elizabeth panics, certain that he's furious with her. Determined to clear the air, she resolves to tell him nothing is going on with Prince August. She forces a bright, if awkward, laugh to break the tension. Gathering her courage, Elizabeth earnestly compliments Caesar's valor on the battlefield. Caught completely off guard by her praise, a deep blush spreads across Caesar's face. Still flustered, he turns back toward her, starting to speak. He spontaneously invites her to have tea with him. Stunned into silence by the unexpected offer, Elizabeth can only stammer in response. Seeing her hesitation, Caesar asks if she doesn't want to, prompting Elizabeth to realize she must answer. Knowing a refusal would only worsen the situation, she quickly agrees to his invitation. A moment later, a magnificent tiered tray of desserts is set before them. While Elizabeth gasps, awestruck by the lavish spread. She gives a polite curtsy, thanking him for the invitation. A maid arrives, smiling as she announces that she has brought the tea. Elizabeth notes with surprise that it's Emma, the only maid present, as they settle in at the table. Watching Caesar sip his tea, she quietly wonders if he is trying to be considerate of her. A hand gently stirs a teacup. Elizabeth takes a sip from her own cup, while Caesar observes her. He picks up a small pastry from the tray, drawing her attention. As he takes a bite, she watches him with a curious expression. Elizabeth remarks on his unexpected sweet tooth, and he confirms his fondness for sweets, asking if she dislikes them. She hastily denies it, promising to enjoy the pastries. Taking a bite, she is genuinely surprised by how delicious it is. Caesar smiles warmly, pleased that the treats suit her taste. Looking toward Emma, Elizabeth asks Caesar if he personally selected the pastries. She turns her gaze back to Caesar, awaiting his answer. They share a quiet moment together in the sun-drenched room. She offers him a pleasant, gentle smile. Caesar confirms that he did choose them, and she listens while sipping her tea. Suddenly, she realizes she's made a terrible mistake by revealing knowledge from her past life. She recalls that Caesar and Alice's engagement hasn't been announced yet, a fact her current self shouldn't know. She rationalizes that as Alice's older sister, it's natural she would know, but Caesar seems unconvinced. He calls her bluff, reminding her they didn't get along, his piercing gaze warning her not to lie. A wave of terror washes over Elizabeth, as she realizes one wrong word could mean her death. Caesar's intense eyes remain fixed on her, waiting for a truthful answer. She hesitates, struggling to form a coherent response under his scrutiny. He maintains a stern, unreadable expression. Elizabeth explains that she had simply heard rumors about Alice and Prince August and assumed their engagement was imminent. A flashback shows Alice becoming crown princess after marrying Caesar. She recalls the gossip surrounding the prince who lost the throne, being engaged to the crown princess's younger sister. Back in the present, she feels Caesar's gaze seeing right through her but forces herself to remain steady. With a practiced smile, she explains her duty to know about her sister's fiancé and adds that a wife like Alice would be unsuitable for him. She closes her eyes, desperately hoping her explanation was convincing enough. Caesar remains silent, his expression giving nothing away. An awkward silence hangs between them in the grand room. He finally breaks the silence, stating that he understands how she feels. Elizabeth is perplexed by his seemingly disappointed tone, wondering what she said wrong. Her own wide-eyed, confused reflection stares back at her from the surface of her tea. In an opulent room, Caesar sits down with a quiet, deliberate motion. Elizabeth finds Caesar standing by a window and hesitantly calls his name. Turning to her, Caesar asks Elizabeth if she would have dinner with him that evening. He recalls her past self-deprecating words, believing a wife like her wasn't suitable for him. Standing alone, Caesar realizes with a sigh that this is how she perceives him. He reflects that if she were still her old self, things might be different now. He remembers seeing her during tea, noting her etiquette was truly impeccable. He recalls receiving reports that Elizabeth had been diligently attending her etiquette lessons. Contrasting her past struggles with her recent hard work, he concludes she must have put in immense effort to improve so much. He remembers her calling him a man who only cares for family status, and grimly accepts he brought that perception on himself. Caesar contemplates Elizabeth's new role in his life, wondering if she is an enemy like Alice, or perhaps something else entirely. A confident smile spreads across his face as he decides he's looking forward to what comes next. Elsewhere, Elizabeth stands with a maid, her expression serious and contemplative. She remembers how Caesar previously acted as if being associated with her would only cause him trouble. She recalls how even approaching him in her past life earned her a frosty glare and rejection, forcing her to admire him from afar. Confused by his sudden change after she promised to keep her distance, Elizabeth clutches her dress in a moment of panic. Two maids excitedly announce they'll prepare an extra special dinner, much to Elizabeth's flustered surprise. When a maid insists it's a special occasion, Elizabeth quietly reflects that she never had such caring maids in her previous life. Watched by her staff, Elizabeth stands in a sparkling haze, acknowledging how much things have truly changed. She sets her thoughts aside, focusing on what is most important in the present moment. At the dining table, Caesar waits for her to join him. The table is set with a beautiful, sparkling meal. Caesar sits with a stern expression, ready to begin the dinner. They sit in silence at opposite ends of a very long dining table. As they eat, Elizabeth looks down at her plate, wondering why he invited her. She nervously glances up at Caesar, who sits across from her. Answering a question, Elizabeth explains she was trying not to be arrogant, inwardly bracing herself for a scolding. She looks up in surprise at his unexpected response, questioning what he said. Caesar tells her she's much more pleasant now, causing a blush to rise on her cheeks. After the meal, Caesar stands beside the elegantly set table. Elizabeth sits alone, pondering why everything has changed so completely from her last life. She watches Caesar drink his wine, thinking to herself that he is undeniably stunning. He catches her staring and asks if she has something she wants to say. Flustered, a chibi Elizabeth quickly denies it, insisting it's nothing at all. She steels her resolve, vowing not to fall for him again as she refuses to be killed by the man she loves. Just as she solidifies her determination, she finds herself outside, looking shocked. She sees Caesar approaching through the sunlit garden and calls out his name in disbelief. Internally, she panics, wondering why she keeps running into the very person she's been trying to avoid. Caesar's voice drifts through the leaves, inviting her to take a stroll through the city with him. He stands before her and gently takes her hand, the sunlight filtering down around them. Stunned by the unprecedented invitation, Elizabeth suspects a plot with Alice but finds she has no reason to refuse him. When he mentions they'll need commoners' disguises, a brilliant idea strikes her. She feigns dismay, claiming she has no suitable clothes, but Caesar calmly reveals he already had an outfit prepared for her. Elizabeth is completely floored when he explains he had it made in advance, anticipating this very day. Her mind races with disbelief, realizing he must have taken her measurements while she was asleep. A chibi Elizabeth gasps in horror at the implication, startling a chibi Caesar. Trying to suppress a laugh, Caesar turns away with a slight cough. Elizabeth stares at him, her expression a mixture of confusion and embarrassment. Ugh, she mentally shakes her head, aghast at her own creepy and ridiculous imagination. Overwhelmed with embarrassment, she quickly apologizes and dashes off to get changed. Realizing he saw through her excuse, Elizabeth accepts she has no choice but to go. After her maids help her dress, Elizabeth prepares for the outing by putting on a simple hooded cloak. Donning the hood, she laments that she needs to hide her distinct black hair. With a shiver of resolve, she prepares to leave. Determined, Elizabeth decides it's time to go, reminding herself that Caesar must be waiting. Disguised in commoner's clothes, Caesar waits for her beside a magnificent royal carriage. As she approaches, Caesar hopes he didn't keep her waiting. A bit nervously, Elizabeth agrees to proceed. Caesar gallantly helps a cloaked Elizabeth into the carriage. Elizabeth thanks him politely, and he inwardly notes with surprise that she doesn't mind the plain outfit. He recalls her usual flashy style and smiles, realizing he was wrong to assume she would refuse. Once they're seated inside, a curious Elizabeth calls out to him. She inwardly marvels that even dressed as a mercenary, Caesar still exudes an undeniable elegance. Elizabeth scolds herself for admiring the very man who might have ordered her execution. Caesar sets the terms for their outing, declaring them an ordinary woman and a mercenary, which Elizabeth agrees to as their carriage departs. Adjusting her hood, Elizabeth reminds herself to stay alert and alter her speech to fit in. The royal carriage, drawn by 4 white horses, travels down a dusty road. As they step out, Caesar asks for Elizabeth's hand, startling her. Holding his hand out, he asks if she is unaccustomed to the city streets. Flustered, Elizabeth admits he's right, but quickly backtracks on her protest about holding hands. Amused by her changed manner of speaking, Caesar insists she hold his hand so she won't get lost. Elizabeth stares down at his offered hand, rendered speechless. Caesar gently takes her hand and leads her into the bustling street. Their hands now linked, they begin their walk through the town. Elizabeth looks up with wide, curious eyes at the sights of the commoner's market. A look of awe spreads across her face as she takes in the lively surroundings. She continues to watch the scene unfold, completely captivated. The marketplace is alive with cheerful vendors and townsfolk going about their day. Everywhere she looks, Elizabeth sees signs of vibrant life, from merchants calling out to children begging for treats. Her attention is caught by a vendor selling grilled skewers to an eager young boy. Elizabeth reflects that seeing this world for herself reveals a brilliance she never knew. She contrasts this with the world of nobles, whose refined smiles hide envy and inner corruption. Her eyes land on a cheerful merchant laughing with a customer. She realizes with clarity that her former self would have never appreciated this simple beauty. A painful memory surfaces of her time in prison, falsely accused and forced to live in rags. She recalls the despair of reaching for a guard, trapped and alone. Returning to the present, she stands beside Caesar amidst the crowd, feeling a world away from her past. With a gentle smile, Elizabeth concludes that the life of commoners is far more beautiful than that of nobles. She pictures the simple happiness of a commoner family, a stark contrast to her own life. Caesar asks if she's angry he brought her to such a place, but she quickly assures him she's not. Beaming, Elizabeth sincerely thanks him for the experience, much to his surprise. Caesar stifles a laugh at her unexpected gratitude, and when she asks what's funny, he dismisses it. He tightens his grip on her hand as they continue their stroll. Together, they walk through the vibrant market, both of them smiling warmly. Her eyes are drawn to a stall piled high with fresh, sparkling fruit. A friendly fruit vendor offers them a sample as they pass by. Elizabeth's eyes widen in surprise at the simple, kind gesture. The vendor cheerfully holds out a shiny red apple for Elizabeth. Standing together, Caesar and Elizabeth share a moment of genuine, simple happiness. Elizabeth's curiosity is piqued by skewers of grilled meat, wondering aloud about the unfamiliar food. Caesar offers Elizabeth a skewer of grilled meat with a smile. Elizabeth nervously asks how to eat the crude food, while Caesar admits he expected her to refuse it, realizing he was testing her. Elizabeth glares as Caesar feigns ignorance. She marvels that a prince would eat commoner food, and wonders if he frequents the market. After taking a bite, her eyes widen in an instant of pure shock. The delicious flavor overwhelms her as she covers her mouth, completely captivated. Caesar watches her reaction with a satisfied, knowing smirk. As a man suddenly puts his hand on Elizabeth's shoulder, Caesar's expression hardens. An advertisement for the Scanlation Group is displayed. From Caesar's perspective, the man stands with his hand on a cloaked Elizabeth's shoulder. The man's hand startles Elizabeth as he grips her shoulder. With a cheerful grin, a man throws his arm around Elizabeth and asks if she's Caesar's girlfriend. He loudly praises Elizabeth's beauty, teasing Caesar for hiding such a stunning woman away. Elizabeth is shocked to be called beautiful for the first time, as Caesar silently glares. Caesar turns away, while Elizabeth gives the man a suspicious look. The man remains cheerfully oblivious, his arms still around a deeply uncomfortable Elizabeth. When he suggests they all get a meal together, Caesar forcefully grabs his wrist and orders him to shut it. The man is stunned by the reaction, realizing Caesar is actually jealous as his glare intensifies. Caesar coldly threatens to cut out the man's tongue, forcing him to nervously relent. He looks at Elizabeth's hands, observing that they belong to someone who works hard. Blushing, Elizabeth remembers how her hands became rough from doing chores herself to spare her attendants. The man apologizes to Caesar, admitting he had suspected him of being a noble spy. Now that the misunderstanding is cleared, the man cheerfully says his goodbyes to Caesar and Elizabeth. Caesar stops him, declaring he'll accompany Elizabeth since they are on a date. As Caesar leads her away, Elizabeth glances back, completely bewildered by his statement. After making sure they aren't being followed, Elizabeth confirms the coast is clear. Caesar sternly warns her never to speak of their outing to anyone, and she agrees. As he begins to explain the reason, Elizabeth looks up at him with a questioning gaze. Her eyes widen in shock at the gravity of his unspoken warning. Caesar gravely explains that if the Duke of Clarity finds out, there will be serious consequences. The scene shifts to a quiet table set with herbs, vials, and a mortar for making medicine. Back in her room, Elizabeth reflects on the chaotic day while preparing some herbs. She recalls Caesar's angry outburst and the man's apology for misjudging him. The memory of Caesar's stern warning to keep their date a secret lingers in her mind. She continues her work, pondering the implications of his secrecy. Taking a moment, she inhales the lovely scent of lavender with a peaceful smile. She flashes back to her childhood, remembering how her parents would yell and beat her while no one dared to help. The memory reveals she had to learn to treat her own hidden wounds using herbs from her father's study. She quietly reflects on how that painful knowledge has unexpectedly become helpful to her now. A maid approaches Elizabeth from behind, curiously asking what Her Highness is making. Elizabeth explains she is making an ointment, and the maid remarks on its wonderful smell. Calling her Emma, Elizabeth gently asks to see her hand for a moment. Elizabeth takes Emma's hand and begins to gently apply the soothing ointment she made. The two share a tender moment as Emma watches Elizabeth care for her. Overcome with emotion, Emma tearfully expresses her happiness at Elizabeth's kind gesture. Elizabeth smiles, pleased that Emma likes the ointment, while Emma is overcome with joy at being cared for by Her Highness. Emma shyly asks if it would be okay to share the ointment with the other maids. Elizabeth is taken aback by the simple, heartfelt request. Her expression turns somber as she considers the implications of an ointment made by someone with her distinct black hair. Emma grabs Elizabeth's hands and passionately calls out to Her Highness, full of emotion. Emma tearfully insists she knows how truly kind Elizabeth is to the staff and even to Prince Caesar. Elizabeth gently takes her hand, reassuring her that something like hair color doesn't matter. She remembers a past moment as a child in a hood, her small hand held by a comforting one. In the present, Elizabeth shows Emma how to mix the final ingredients for an ointment. With a clap, Emma joyfully announces that the ointment is finally finished as Elizabeth smiles beside her. Emma thanks her profusely and rushes off to share the ointment, leaving Elizabeth to quietly agree. Elizabeth wonders if others will accept a gift from someone with black hair, as she decides to leave. Emma excitedly presents the ointment to other maids, announcing Elizabeth made it with her, which shocks them. Overhearing them, Elizabeth's hopes fall as she thinks her fears were confirmed. One of the maids stares in disbelief, wondering how the cruel princess could be so kind. The maids are delighted by the ointment's lovely scent, touched that Elizabeth would care for them. From down the hall, Elizabeth watches the maids happily interacting with one another. As a maid wholeheartedly agrees with the others, Elizabeth looks on with a pained expression. Hearing them call themselves lowly, Elizabeth reaffirms that they are all incredibly precious to her. She recalls a harsh reality of palace life, where maids are looked down upon, and admits she did the same in her past life. Filled with regret, Elizabeth vows to make up for her past cruelty in this new life. The finished ointment is shown in a small silver tin. Elsewhere, Prince August examines the tin while Caesar watches, questioning why Elizabeth would make wound ointment. He wonders how a noble lady would even possess the knowledge to create such medicine. The red-haired attendant reports that an investigation revealed Elizabeth suffered harsh punishment as a child without proper medical treatment. Prince August clenches his fist, envisioning a young, crying Elizabeth as he processes the grim news. He realizes with horror that she must have learned to make medicine just to treat her own wounds. Looking out the window, Prince August sadly calls her a pitiful woman. He theorizes that she was raised as a puppet, never allowed to defy her family's will. He notes with grim satisfaction that this information has not yet been reported to the Duke. Prince August looks down at the ointment tin, a conflicted and flustered expression on his face. Caesar's attendant observes Prince August's expression, noting that he seems relieved. A flashback shows a disguised Elizabeth looking surprised by a question. In the memory, she smiles and confirms that she was, in fact, relieved. She covers her mouth, surprised by the delicious food she's holding. Prince August smiles fondly, lost in the pleasant memory. The scene shifts to a beautiful, sunlit gazebo near a pristine pool. A radiant Elizabeth is welcomed to the gathering as Lady Shay. She greets a blonde woman, formally addressing her as the Empire's shining star. The blonde woman laughs warmly in response to the flattering title. She expresses her disappointment that they couldn't talk more at the last party, and is glad Elizabeth came. Elizabeth replies that she is also happy to be there. She then tentatively asks the woman if she would mind just calling her Elizabeth. Surprised by the informal request, the woman asks if she is sure that's okay. The woman is delighted by the offer, admitting she's wanted to become closer for a while. She then invites Elizabeth to call her Michelle, which catches Elizabeth off guard. Elizabeth hesitates, pausing with her teacup in hand. She considers the implications of using Michelle's first name. She realizes aloud that calling her by her first name would make it seem like they're close. Her blunt assessment leaves Michelle, who is sipping her tea, momentarily confused. Michelle's confusion quickly turns into a sly, knowing laugh. Elizabeth is thrown off balance by the sudden shift in Michelle's demeanor. Michelle watches her with a confident and amused smile. Elizabeth looks back, still trying to understand the situation. Michelle laughs again, revealing she knows Elizabeth was trying to make her an ally and says it's not surprising. A noble lady with braided hair gives a serene, knowing smile. She sits for tea with another noblewoman in an elegant, sunlit gazebo. The dark-haired noblewoman eyes her companion with suspicion, wondering if she's being manipulated or trapped by an associate of someone named Alice. She explains she only invited her because the other woman was so kind at a previous tea party. The blonde-haired lady smiles warmly, admitting she must have misunderstood her intentions. The dark-haired woman notes her companion isn't pressing the issue and recalls the formidable reputation of Lady Shay, a warrior noblewoman. The lady with the braid cheerfully asks if she'll be attending an upcoming event with the crown prince. Taking a sip of tea, the dark-haired woman coolly confirms that is indeed her plan. Her companion erupts in sparkling joy, much to the other's complete bewilderment. Wondering why she's so happy, the dark-haired woman listens as her guest asks about a trendy new boutique. She admits she doesn't follow trends, and her companion feigns disappointment. She laments that Queen Lillian bought out that particular boutique, so they refused to make a dress for her. A thought strikes her as she remembers that Lady Shay invested in a different boutique that was wildly successful. Turning the conversation, she says she needs a new dress and asks Lady Michelle if she would be willing to be on her side. Michelle smiles, saying she would truly like for them to grow closer. As she agrees, a maid approaches and presents her with a writing set. The silver tray holds a fresh sheet of paper, an inkwell, and a quill. After signing the document, she hands it to Michelle, asking if she can agree to the terms. Michelle gasps in shock as she reads the document. The dark-haired lady coolly reminds Michelle of her villainous reputation, and that Michelle was the one who asked to be on her side. To her surprise, Michelle bursts into joyous laughter while holding the paper. Michelle winks, apologizing for underestimating Princess Elizabeth. Elizabeth asks if this means she's backing out, but Michelle insists she's not, just surprised by how different Elizabeth is from the rumors. Michelle holds the agreement, smiling with genuine admiration and excitement. Elizabeth watches Michelle closely, trying to decipher her true thoughts. She suddenly panics, worrying her infamous dark hair will ruin the dress's popularity. A memory surfaces of Prince August dancing with a gleeful Alice at a grand ball. Elizabeth grimaces, recalling the humiliation of having to attend that same ball without an escort from Prince Caesar. The scene shifts to the elegant exterior of the boutique. In another memory, Alice beams while wearing a stunning white gown. Prince August looks at her with adoration, telling her the dress suits her perfectly. Alice gazes at her reflection with a cruel smirk, eager to see the upset look on her rival's face. The scene returns to the present, where Elizabeth is having tea with Caesar. Elizabeth prepares to speak to Prince Caesar as a slice of cake sits before him. Caesar glances up at her, coldly asking if she's about to request a favor. With a bright smile, Elizabeth asks if they have received an invitation to the upcoming ball. Caesar casually takes a bite of cake and gives a non-committal response. Frustrated, Elizabeth wonders if he's avoiding the topic because of Alice and Prince August, but she resolves to push forward. Looking down, she asks sadly if he wasn't even sent an invitation. Caesar states he never said that, prompting Elizabeth to look up and pointedly ask if he's going with her. Elizabeth beams with delight, declaring them a couple of one heart, while Caesar remains stone-faced. She admits she was worried he'd refuse, especially since she already told Lady Michelle they were attending together, which catches Caesar's attention. Leaning forward, Caesar offers a charming, enigmatic smile. He surprises a bewildered Elizabeth by revealing he always intended to go and has already chosen a boutique for her dress. Flustered, Elizabeth insists she can order it herself, but Caesar casually mentions he'll place the order for her tomorrow. Her mind races as she wonders if he's suggesting they go shopping together. Caesar lets out a cheerful laugh, thoroughly enjoying her reaction. Elizabeth stares at him, utterly shocked by his unexpected turn of character. She muses on how matching outfits are for happy couples, imagining a sweet scene of them together. Cringing at her own thoughts, she feels a wave of embarrassment as night falls over the palace. Elizabeth and Caesar are at a dressmaker shop, where a seamstress gestures enthusiastically toward a mirror. In a flashback, Elizabeth tells the seamstress to proceed with a specific design, and she happily agrees. In a separate memory, Caesar watches Michelle, thinking he'd already prepared an outfit, but is impressed she won over Lady Shay. Michelle smiles, looking radiant and confident in a green gown. A smirk crosses Caesar's face as he finds the situation amusing. The scene shifts to a magnificent, crowded ballroom, shimmering with golden light. Alice stands beside Prince August, the picture of a perfect couple. As other ladies admire Alice and August, the hem of a magnificent gown enters the scene. Alice looks up, her expression one of utter shock. From behind, Elizabeth and Caesar make a grand entrance into the glittering hall. A view from the floor shows a guest's elegant dress sweeping past the crowd. Alice stares intently, her gaze fixed on the newcomers with a dark expression. Caesar and Elizabeth appear arm in arm, breathtaking in matching red and gold formal wear. Caesar wonders if Elizabeth was always so beautiful, as guests murmur about their matching outfits, implying a close relationship. Elizabeth spots a delicious-looking cake and points it out to Caesar. She asks if he'd like to share it, privately hoping to find a way to stay by his side longer. Caesar wonders if she's being considerate of him, but agrees to have cake with her later. Elizabeth's attention is caught by her sister across the room, and she thinks, "Ah." Alice, putting on a warm smile, Elizabeth approaches her sister and cheerfully asks how she has been. Hiccup. Alice is visibly startled by Elizabeth's friendly greeting, as a guest nearby praises her refined demeanor. A guest internally marvels at the intricate embroidery on Elizabeth's dress, wondering about its origin. The two couples, Elizabeth with Caesar and Alice with August, now stand facing one another. Caesar glares coolly at August, pointedly asking if he looks unwell. Flustered, August stammers an apology to his brother, insisting that's not what he meant. Alice begins a flowery, formal greeting, but Caesar cuts her off and grabs her dress, telling her to skip the formalities. Elizabeth asks Caesar if he would mind staying with Alice for a moment. Standing beside August, Caesar readily agrees to the request. August then politely asks Elizabeth to please look after Alice. As the princes seem poised for a private discussion, Elizabeth thinks the timing is perfect. Another guest approaches, complimenting Elizabeth on her truly stunning dress. A woman in a pink gown enthusiastically praises Elizabeth's eye-catching outfit, declaring she looks the most radiant person there. The woman and her friends sweep toward Elizabeth and Alice. Elizabeth internally scoffs, thinking that Lady Colonna must be as foolish as she appears, while Colonna laughs aloud. Elizabeth reminds herself that mocking Lady Colonna would be tantamount to mocking Caesar himself. She offers a polite, if cool, reply to Lady Colonna, stating that she is truly honored by the praise. Alice clenches her fists, thinking that Elizabeth's dress somehow surpasses those from even the most famous boutiques. With newfound resolve, Alice composes herself with a serene smile. The unspoken challenge is declared between their piercing gazes. "You've lost, Alice." Elizabeth thanks Alice, noting she's the only one who's ever praised her so. Alice insists it's simply the truth. Alice's eyes are drawn to the intricate pattern on her sister's gown as she asks about the embroidery design. She asks if Elizabeth requested the design herself. Elizabeth smirks, confirming she did and that she expected the question. Alice stares at the beautiful embroidery on the dress, once again asking about its design. Focusing on the detailed gold work, she presses Elizabeth, asking if she personally requested the pattern. Elizabeth looks at her sister with a confident smile and calmly confirms, "Yes, I did." The design's meaning is explained. The crossed swords are the prestigious emblem of an imperial medal, currently held by Caesar. Elizabeth recalls how, in her previous life, Alice shamelessly used that same honorable design for her own selfish purposes. A hand gestures to a sketch, explaining the symbolism of the two crossed swords representing a husband and wife. In a flashback, the seamstress expresses her surprise at Elizabeth's choice, recognizing the intent behind the embroidery. The seamstress reveals she had the exact same idea, showing a sketch of two crossed swords meant to carry the same meaning. Elizabeth remembers how, at the ball in her past, Alice proudly took credit for the design, passing it off as her own idea. Lady Colonna gasps in utter shock at Elizabeth's declaration. Elizabeth condescendingly asks how a count's daughter could misunderstand the embroidery, prompting Lady Colonna to angrily demand her meaning. Elizabeth proudly declares she wore the design to express her intent to be her husband's equal and strength. Ugh, Lady Colonna groans, completely defeated. As confused guests wonder what is happening, Lady Colonna shouts in protest. She argues that a woman's true happiness is found in supporting her husband from behind. Elizabeth calmly counters that men and women simply have their own distinct roles to play. Inspired, another guest questions why women are seen as inferior, and others murmur their agreement. Elizabeth concludes that since both fulfill their duty to the household, that should be enough to earn equal respect. The crowd erupts in a collective gasp of awe and realization. Clap, clap, One guest admits her progressive views are surprising, while another agrees that Lady Elizabeth seems different now. Alice watches in stunned silence as the room applauds her sister. Elizabeth thinks to herself that this is how she will win back everyone who once stood by Alice's side. Alice looks up at her sister, appearing small and utterly defeated. Elizabeth blushes, privately admitting she just wanted to feel a little closer to Caesar. While Lady Colonna seethes, other guests coo over Elizabeth's charm and the obvious love shown by her matching outfit with Caesar. Elizabeth coolly wonders what Alice will do now that her plan is in motion. Alice turns her fury on Lady Colonna, who is startled by the sudden confrontation. The terrified Lady Colonna stammers Alice's name in disbelief. Alice declares she cannot forgive Colonna's behavior. As guests note, she is shrewdly placing the blame to protect her own reputation. As Lady Colonna drops to her knees, begging for forgiveness, Alice dramatically tells her to wait, sniffle, sob. Alice begins to cry, telling Colonna not to weep as Elizabeth watches the performance. A memory of a younger, gentler Alice appears as narration, states that such kindness doesn't apply to her. The narrator explains that Alice has carefully cultivated an image of compassion and possesses a natural, disarming charm. Elizabeth realizes everyone is now watching, waiting to see how she will respond to her supposedly kind-hearted sister. Standing tall amidst the crowd, Elizabeth decides what her answer will be.